Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 132 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Christian, and I'm joined by our co-host, Brad.
Hello, everybody.
Before we get too far into this episode, I just want to remind everyone that Common Knowledge and all of the podcasts on the Constructive Criticism Network are sponsored by PureMTGO.com. If you'd like to support the show, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Common Knowledge YouTube channel and check out our Patreon. With that out of the way, let's get on with the podcast for the week.
Woo-hoo. So what's going on, buddy?
So what have you been up to, man?
Jinx. Not a whole lot. Same old stuff. Just working, hanging out at the house, hanging out with the family, doing some odds and ends around here, picking up stuff, finally finishing some projects that have been on the lists for a while and starting some projects that have been on a different list for a while. So that always feels good. It's kind of annoying, because I'd rather just be sitting around playing Magic, but duty calls, I suppose. What about you?
Yeah, no, nothing much. Just living life. I actually got to play some IRL Magic this week, so that's cool.
Yeah, it's always cool. I think that's going to take us into what we're playing this week, huh? Or what we played last week.
This past week, I actually got to sit down, play some EDH. Got to play my Urza deck. That was a lot of fun. And then we got a group of 5 or 6 together to also draft one of my friend's cubes. That was also really sick.
Was that the same... the cube players, was that also your EDH pod, as they call it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all the same people.
Groovy. Now, what's your you said Urza is your commander, correct? Is this something you built from the ground up, like from scratch, or how does Christian go about building a commander deck?
Same way I go about building any deck. I go to the internet, rip something, and then our EDH group is a little bit more lax, and Urza is a very powerful commander. Mm-hmm. So really, I took like an Urza deck that I suspected wasn't the strongest, and then made a few more changes to kind of scale it back a little bit, just because, whenever we play EDH, we're mostly just there to hang out, laugh, tell jokes, and it's really easy to make things more powerful, but it's never easy to make things less powerful. Right. So I opted to start on the lower end of the power spectrum.
Right. Good on you. Look at you pleasing the community.
Absolutely. And then, when we cubed, it's sort of like one of my friends' takes on the modern cube. Mm-hmm. And I ended up with like a 5-color bring to light twin thing. And, it was a lot of fun. We got to play a lot of really sick games, including one where my friend Nathan and I played one game that felt like it lasted forever. And it was to the point where we were each counting the deck, like the cards in our individual deck, because we concluded that was the only way either one of us could win. And so then it was like he had the monarchy, so he was winning on board and with cards in hand. But that also played to his disadvantage because we were both about to deck with like less than 10 cards left in our library. Right. So, it was a sweet time.
That sounds like a good time. You said it was just at a buddy's house, or did you go to a shop and hang out?
Yeah, it was just at a friend's house.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I can't wait to get my Pauper Cube a little more tuned up. Started building it about a year and a half ago, and now it's just become cards that I think are neat, and I put them in sleeves and throw them into a box. It's no longer much of a cube, I guess, so I need to go through it, sort of trim it down, fine-tune it up, polish it, and then maybe take it to the shop one day or something and give it a whirl.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Cubing is super sick. Have you been playing any Magic this past week?
I played a little bit, some random matches here and there online on MTGO when I had time. We weren't too much around the house on Saturday and Sunday, just kind of out and about, enjoying the weather, just getting out of the house, for once. But no, really, I just kind of chatting brews, chatting Pauper. I'm always thinking of some off-the-wall Tortured Existence brew that I'll probably never put together, but it's fun to think about. but I am probably going to test in paper anyway. I'm probably going to test either Affinity or Blue-Black Fairies so I can get a little better with those and take them to the shop for the next Pauper event. Usually I bring brews, but I'm tired of losing. I need to get some of that sweet, sweet store credit.
Both Affinity and Blue-Black Delver or Blue-Black Fairies are a really good way to win.
Yeah,
so.
To be fair, I'm pretty comfortable with the new Affinity. I'm not very comfortable with Blue-Black Fairy, so I want to get good with it in case by the time I get to the shop, something is banned out of Affinity and I have to pivot suddenly. But yeah, that's pretty much my plan. A lot of mental exercises and deck theorizing, but not a whole lot of actual play. Probably because the meta has been less than stellar.
Because the meta is less than stellar, we've actually decided to take a break from talking about Pauper this week.
It is always good to step back, whether you're building a deck or your personal life, professional life. If you're playing a specific format, just take a step back, take a breather. That's what we're kind of doing this week. We're taking a step back from classic Pauper, or Pauper as we typically talk about and play. But we're not stepping away from the game, are we?
I thought that it would be a really great time, to introduce all of our listeners to my new favorite pastime, Fantasy WWE.
Let's do it. We are the Fantasy WWE podcast.
Absolutely.
Common SmackDown.
But really, we'll be talking about the ultra budget format. Most of the decks you could play for free right now, at least on MTGO. Talking about Penny Dreadful.
So this format's been around for a while. We'll get into all the details later, and I'll kind of go into my relationship with the format. But Penny Dreadful, it's kind of like Pauper was in the beginning. It's strictly a player-run format. That's pretty much what I know about it. They hold their own leagues on MTGO. They sort of monitor their own format. It's all sort of self-contained within the community itself, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's definitely the sense that I get. For those that don't know, Penny Dreadful is a format that basically, if a card costs less than 2 cents on MTGO, it's legal. Now, there is a lack of stability in card prices, especially at those really low numbers where cards might go from like 2 cents to 4 cents. So they found that the best way to actually regulate it is that in between every standard legal set release, they, for a week, track the prices of all cards. And any card that is 2 cents or less for half of the hours during that week is going to be legal until the next standard set release. And so it sort of gives it like its own like insular rotation in a way, in that, if a deck becomes really popular in Penny Dreadful, it's a really popular format, and getting cards to cost more than 2 cents isn't necessarily hard on Magic Online. So if a card or a deck becomes overplayed, it's going to rise over that 2 cent cost, and then at next rotation, that overpowered deck is going to lose, probably 3 or 4 cards.
Yep, exactly. And like we were talking about before the show, at the very worst, you'll have to put up with an OP deck for 3 months, 2.5 months or so, 2 months before the next set comes out. And like you mentioned, they monitor the prices of all the cards. That's not this isn't a format that's restricted by rarity. This is every single card that's available on MTGO that is 2 cents or less is legal in this format. So that just opens up pretty much endless possibilities as far as metagame, archetypes, brewing, everything.
Yeah, and you even mentioned earlier that one of the things that really intrigued you about the format is there's a lot of what-if cards that you can play with. So, a lot of cards that maybe you went, what if this card was legal in Pauper? And it's, they're legal in Penny Dreadful, and some of them are really good in the format.
Yeah, some of them are excellent in the format. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Some of the what-if cards, like we'll get into it, I'm sure, when we talk about specific decks a little bit later. But, yeah, just cards that I've always thought, I'll see 15 copies of it in my bulk box there in my closet, and I'm just like, oh, I wish I could play with this somewhere. That would be fun to play in traditional Pauper, or I wish there was a format where this card was good. And lo and behold, I think Penny Dreadful is probably the place for that specific card.
Yeah, and another really cool thing about Penny Dreadful, and this is something that I think you really appreciate, and I could be mistaken about that, but that brewing decks and Penny Dreadful is literally just as easy as thinking, oh, this would be cool. I wonder if that's legal. And then as long as it's legal, you can probably brew a decent deck around it. And there's just tons and tons, literal like hundreds, if not thousands of decks that you can look through for inspiration at any time.
Yeah, unique decks. It's not quite like brewing a pauper deck where I'll come up with some silly combo or, strategy or synergy in my head, and I'll go to Scryfall and I'll look up all the cards that have this keyword or do this specific thing I want them to do, and none of them are pauper legal. So I can't. It's just pointless. You know what I mean? But there's a good chance that most of them are legal in Penny Dreadful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I sort of want to go ahead and get this out of the way at the beginning. I said a couple of minutes ago that most of the decks in Penny Dreadful are free. So I just want to go ahead and explain how that could be.
Oh, yeah. You did kind of gloss over that, and I missed it.
So if you go to Mana Traders, or is the other one Card Hoarder?
Card Hoarder, yep.
Yeah.
Cardhoarder.com.
Both of those rental services have free rental programs for, I believe, Mana Traders is 7 tickets or less, and as Card Hoarder 10 tickets or less?
5
tickets or less.
Yep, as long as you have an account there already.
Yeah.
Now there is, I don't mean to interrupt you too much or go off on a tangent or whatever. With the unbelievable popularity of Modern Horizons 2 on Magic Online, places like Card Hoarder and Mana Traders have pretty much paused/suspended all of their rental accounts because they're simply just out of cards. Like they can't keep up with the demand. So from what I understand, if you don't already have an account, you may not likely to be getting one in the immediate future, but I'm sure that'll change as cards become more available. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that for Card Hoarder. I hadn't seen that for Mana Traders yet.
Yeah, I believe it's kind of hitting all of them, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, that does suck, but I'm sure eventually you'll be able to get back in there. And,
Sure.
Even if you had to outright buy the decks, just looking at the top 8 decks for the format for the last 30 days, 7 of the top 8 costs less than 7 tickets. And it looks like 5 of them, 8 most popular decks cost just 2 tickets. To me, that is like the ultimate budget format. You know what I mean?
And then almost, I'd have to imagine it almost becomes a separate competition maybe within yourself to see how cheap you can get the deck while still being competitive. How far below that 2 cent per card mark can you hit it and still be a good deck,
Mm-hmm.
At least that's probably something I would torture myself with.
Yeah. So really what I think we wanted to do here was just sort of talk about some of the decks available for play in the format, either decks that we saw or thought up, sort of give you a slight rundown of them, and then encourage you to try out the format.
Yeah, definitely. It is a Magic Online only format. I can't even imagine the logistics of trying to play it in paper or keep up with it in paper. It just sounds like a nightmare, and it would be completely different, than the cards online. But it's player run, community ran. They run their own leagues. They're free leagues, by the way. I don't know if we mentioned that. What are the typical prizes for the leagues, or do they have them, or is it just like bragging rights?
So the first league that you play, after you complete your 5 matches, you get 1 ticket credit with MTGO Traders. So you can go ahead and use that to put towards a deck. And then the people with the best results from the leagues win credit, additional credit with MTGO Traders. And then there are 7 free to enter weekly tournaments that Card Hoarder hosts. I believe they're hosted on Gatherling, and you would have to go to the Penny Dreadful website for more information, just because they're at different times and stuff like that, and how to sign up. But so they both do free leagues and tournaments that people can play in, and you do have an incentive to do well in the leagues, because if you finish top 8 performers, like I said, you get additional prizes. And just for your first league, you get a ticket, which is going to help you buy your second Penny Dreadful deck.
Yep, that's pretty nice when 1 to 2 tickets can get you an entire deck. But yeah, I wasn't totally sure. I knew that the leagues were free and they ran monthly, but pretty much outside of that, I had no idea. So that's good. because you actually played in a few of them, like you were talking about months ago, maybe towards the end of last year, I guess.
Yeah, 2 seasons ago, I played in a few different leagues. And, if anybody needed any help signing up for leagues or had any questions that we don't really answer in the episode, they can either comment down below or just at one of us on Twitter. I'd be happy to point them in the right direction for how to get started with the format.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, were there any cool decks that you saw that you wanted to highlight?
Well, I'm sure you probably know by now, most of the listeners or my Twitter buddies, my real life buddies know that I'm a big fan of Mono White Heroic. And then second to that would be any sort of Orzhov list. So obviously I sought those two first out when I got on the website. And there are quite a few different versions of Heroic and Orzhov Control. There's an Orzhov combo deck, Orzhov Blink deck, that sort of thing. But the first thing that really caught my eye was the Mono White Heroic deck. It's very similar to almost to what you'd see in Pauper. The only real difference is it's taking out the Laguna Band Trailblazers for creatures like Phalanx Leader. It's the I believe it was an uncommon in original Theros too, but it's a 2 white 1/1 with Heroic. Anytime you cast a spell that targets it, you get to put a counter on all your creatures, a +1/+1 counter on each one of your creatures. I thought that would be huge in Pauper. I doubt we'll ever get that as a downshift, but that would be amazing. And from Theros too, we have Favorite Hoplite, which is another one that gets a +1/+1 counter when you target it, that sort of thing. It's not, like I said, it's not a lot of huge differences from the Pauper version. But just enough that I think it would be very, very fun to play. One of the big enchantment differences I noticed, and I don't think I've ever actually played with this card, is Griff's Boon. It looks like a single white mana for an aura from Shadows over Innistrad. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and it has flying. And then you can return Griff's Boon from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to target creature for a white and 3 generic. So that's pretty cool. But other than that, it's just a straight up Heroic deck. It's just a little more beefy, a little more powerful than what we normally see in Pauper. And I am all for that.
Sounds really good. And, that's one of the things that I really like about Penny Dreadful right now is that, or not just right now, all the time, is that there's really good aggro decks, really good combo decks, really good control decks. And then there's like subsects of each one of those that are also really good.
Right.
So, you really have an affinity for Heroic, and Mono White Heroic is really respectable in the format. But there are other aggro decks, not at all like Heroic, that are also good in the format.
Yeah, they have we were looking at it before we started recording. They have an entire archetype breakdown on one of their pages here on pennydreadfulmagic.com. And the first real archetype, we're not going to go through every single one of them. That'd be a couple episodes, I think. But the first, I think it's alphabetized. The first archetype is aggro. And Heroic is sort of that, like you were saying, that subsection of an archetype within aggro. And they have Mono White Heroic, Azorius Heroic, Boros Heroic, and I assume some sort of Mono Red Heroic. So yeah, there's like in Pauper, if you want to play Heroic, you're pretty much going to play Mono White Heroic, and that's about it. Whereas in Penny Dreadful, it looks like there's 3 or 4 decent options to choose from.
To me, that's really exciting because that lets a lot of people put a lot of self-expression within deck choice and all that.
One thing I noticed too, it took me by surprise, but I don't really know why it did, is there's a lot of banned cards from Classic Pauper that see a lot of play in Penny Dreadful. I guess I'm just so used to them. It's so ingrained in me that these cards like Arkham's Astrolabe and Treasure Cruise and all these things are banned. It's just weird to see them being played in a deck, but that's really kind of exciting.
A deck that actually caught my eye, sticking on the more aggressive side of things, was I feel like everybody's going to tune out as soon as I say it. The Affinity deck.
Wah, wah, wah.
Probably, it looks like it's very powerful. It's a slightly different take on Affinity. It's a super aggressive. It sort of reminds me of a mix between Pauper Brute Squad and Modern Affinity. And this is what I mean. I'll just list off some of the cards. So it has Memnite and Ornithopter and Ginger Brute as some of the cards that like you might see play from Pauper. And then it has Signal Pest, which was a staple of Modern Affinity, Arcbound Ravager, which is a staple of Modern Affinity, and Etch Champion, which is a staple of Modern Affinity. And then it has Frogmites, and then it's playing some Thoughtcast, and then Springleaf Drum Cranial Plating. And then it's also playing 4 of Ensoul Artifact, which is a Pioneer All-Star. And, you know, it's got cards from all over, like, the Magic formats, and they all come together in this singular deck to create this nice mono blue, but mostly mono brown aggro deck.
Right. Penny Dreadful Mud deck. It's really cool, too. Excuse me. When you're looking at a list like this, I was kind of going through all the cards of it while you were picking out specific ones. And even though it's an affinity deck, the only actual artifact land in the deck is Darksteel Citadel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's no Ancient Dens or anything like that, Great Furnaces, because obviously they're priced out of the format, as it were. So it's really neat to me that you can get an affinity deck to be as successful as this one without running the shenanigans of having artifact lands.
And, you know, it's just a super nice low to the ground aggro deck that, you know, is going to rely on those smaller drops being attached to an Ensoul Artifact. But then, you know, you got the Thoughtcast to really keep yourself going, and Master of Ethereum is in the deck, which is going to...
They just posted 35 minutes ago, another affinity deck got posted, but it looks to be more heavily red than heavily blue. Galvanic Blasts, they're running Cranial Plating, Shrapnel Blast, that sort of thing.
So this is actually exactly what I mean. Is that I was just talking about mono blue affinity, and you were like, but what about mono red affinity?
Yeah, but
and
what if there was a mono red? And there it is.
And that's super exciting to me that so many things are possible.
You know, this wasn't necessarily on my list of decks to talk about, but just a couple down on the list is mono white Control. And I know I mentioned this before we started recording. I don't know what half the cards in this deck does. But it looks really fun to play, and I'll probably try it out because I know it's not going to cost an arm and a leg, you know. Just a lot of possibilities. I don't know. I'm kind of overwhelmed. My brewing senses are overwhelmed here with this format. Yeah,
and I guess now would actually be a good time to talk about a potential downside of the format.
Okay.
Which is, I said this almost exactly before we started recording, is that sometimes playing Penny Dreadful feels like if Brad was like, hey, Christian, go through all the cards you own and make a deck, and I'm going to go through all the cards I own and make a deck. And then we're both going to drive to California and play a game with them.
Yep.
And that it's sometimes frustrating whenever you like can't really think ahead too much because you have no possible idea what could be in your opponent's deck.
Right.
And so it's hard to game plan based around what your opponent is going to do, which I think for a lot of people is a really critical part of Magic, is thinking about what my opponent is going to do.
Oh, sure.
That being said, that also makes you rely on a skill of context clues, where, you know, okay, my opponent played this card, and this card during game one, and I looked it up, and a different card that would fit in this deck is legal in the format. So now I'm going to play around that card in game two, even if they don't have it. So it slightly flexes different muscles, I would say.
Yeah, definitely different muscles. It's not as intuitive as you would think it is, because kind of like what you were saying, if you see, you know, your opponent's, you have a peak effect and you see your opponent's opening hand for some reason, those cards may not make sense to you as what they are, you know, and you may not be able to judge even rationally what could be on the top of their deck because the format is relegated by price alone. You know, you may look at their opening hand and be like, oh, you know, that would be, if I were them, I'd be running, I don't know, Jace the Mind Sculptor. But obviously that's not going to be in this format. So you kind of have to think outside the box while staying within a strategy.
Yeah, and just to your point, there's a actually an ad nauseum deck in the format. And just thinking if, you had a peak effect and you saw solve the equation, expressive iteration, ponder, sleight of hand, simian spirit guide, you might think blue-red tempo and not crazy combo deck.
Not crazy drain you out. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to put it. Even their meta game, their meta is dozens of decks. I don't know the format well enough to say if there are pillars of the format or not.
Yeah, so the top deck is 5% of the meta, and then the second most popular deck is 3% of the meta, and then no other deck even touches 3% of the meta game.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know, it's just insane to me.
Yeah, because there are just so many options. Is this the actual factual brewer's paradise that everyone says Pauper should be?
I would say so. One of the things that I think goes well for this format as far as brewing is concerned is that even if you don't feel like you can brew in a particular metagame, rotation is only 60 to 90 days away at any given time. You know what I mean?
Yep. Absolutely.
So it's like really, people would probably rely on Penny Dreadful for scratching the brewer's itch, and then when that goes away, they can go back to Pauper or whatever other formats they play, and then knowing that they can pick up Penny Dreadful again in a month and a half and have something completely and totally new to work with.
Yeah, totally new. Now that I've kind of gotten into it a little more, next couple times I get on Magic Online, I'm just going to dedicate a couple decks to Penny Dreadful and just try to get in a couple games here and there, jam some games.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm not somebody that brews often, but even just during our pre-show, I thought of an idea and looked up all the cards, and it was like, oh, okay, most of the cards that I wanted to play are legal. So there's a card called Phyrexian Dreadnought. I'm not sure if you know what it does.
I do. You could probably explain it, though. Before we get into that, though, Scryfall also supports Penny Dreadful as a format. It has the paper prices of cards, the MTGO prices. It'll tell you the legality, just like it would for Standard or Modern or Legacy or Pauper. It'll tell you whether or not a certain card or specific card you look up is legal in Penny Dreadful, which is awesome. That's a very handy tool.
Yes, it is. Thanks for noting that, because I'm sure a lot of people are like, well, how did he look this up so quickly?
Yeah.
So Phyrexian Dreadnought, it's a 1-mana 12/12, I believe. And when it enters the battlefield, you have to sacrifice creatures with power that total 12 or greater. So generally, you might think, okay, this card is obviously very bad. But if you have an effect like Stifle or something like that counters target activated or triggered ability, then you can play Phyrexian Dreadnought, stifle that ability, and then you paid 1 mana for a 12/12. So I was
with Trample.
Yes. And so I was going through the format, and I saw that while Stifle wasn't legal, Trick Bind, which is a 2-mana Stifle that has Split Second, and Disallow, which is a 3-mana Stifle that is also a counterspell, are both legal. So you could play effectively 8 copies of Stifle, 4 of which are also counterspells, and Phyrexian Dreadnought, and then build sort of like a control shell around it.
Mm-hmm. Where this is your main sort of just win con.
Yep. Where assemble this 2-card combo with enough mana to protect it, and then win over the course of 2 to 3 turns.
If anybody out there looks into Scryfall, if you're new to Scryfall or new to using Scryfall specifically for formats, it'll show you every printing of a card as well as every price of every printing of a card. So even though on Magic Online, the Mirage edition of Phyrexian Dreadnought is $3 or 3.5 tickets, $3.50 roughly, there was a Magic Online promotional version of the card printed, and that version is 2 cents.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as any version, any printing of that card falls within the price threshold for Penny Dreadful, you're good to go.
Like I said, I'm not really like the brewer, but the fact that this format can even like make me think of stuff like that, I think shows how strong the format is at that particular thing.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what you come up with. Yeah, I was looking at outside of my typical heroic and Orzhov shenanigans, I was looking at a Izzet Delver blitz style packages to see what Penny Dreadful runs as opposed to, the Pauper decks that I have memorized in this same archetype. And they're just gas. I mean, they're just so much, they're so much fun to think about playing. I cannot wait to actually play one of these. So I'll just kind of run through it real quick. It's your basic, spell slinging damage to the face sort of shell. Very light on creatures, 4 Delver of Secrets, 4 Sprite Dragon, 1 Irayo Soritami Ascendant. I will not read that entire card. It's one of those weird flip creature things. Anyway, Delver's Secret and Sprite Dragon are really the 2 you care about. But, it spells packages, things like Arkham's Astrolabe and Treasure Cruise, which we don't have access to anymore. It's almost like, this also uses Expressive Iteration, which is really popular in Modern at the moment from Strixhaven. Mana Leaks, Ops and Ponders. Obviously, Preordain is not going to be legal in the format, I assume. I haven't checked the price for a while, but I assume it's close to $1 a piece. So it's kind of got the whole Pauper Blitz feel as well as a little splash of Modern in there too, because Modern's, Sprite Dragon's really big with Modern. Is it Prowess is a big deck in Modern, big time, and Sprite Dragon plays a pretty good role in that deck. So it just looks like a lot of fun. I feel like just looking at it without having played it, it looks like a Modern deck, based off power, but without the Modern price tag, I guess.
Yeah, and if you wanted to update just some of the cards that you listed off or upgrade, I guess, I just checked, and Kiln Fiend, which used to be a Pauper All-Star, is also legal in the format. So you could just throw that right in there and then be in business.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing better than a Kiln Fiend with a Teamer Battle Rage. That's awesome. It's probably the best. It's probably my favorite 2-card combo, I guess you want to call it, in the entire format of Pauper. It's just like, I'm going to blow this guy giant and just throw him at you. I guess that would be Fling, but you get the idea.
I don't know. There's just so much about the format that I really don't think I could get into the entire thing.
No, it's almost just from the little bit I've sort of dove into it since we came up with this show topic last week sometime. It's almost as if this format could use its own content, its own podcasts. You know what I mean? There's so much to it. I can see it, just based off rotation alone. I can see how the first couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even a month after rotation, players may need that sort of outlet for what's hot, what's popular now, what's not in the format anymore, what changed out of my deck, what do I need to do, that sort of thing. I know they have a pretty popular Discord for Penny Dreadful for the format, but yeah, basically that's just a long way of saying that there is a lot going on in this format.
Yeah, so there is a lot going on. The Discord, like you said, their website actually has a lot of really good deck building resources that send you to deck lists, and there's a deck checker, and there are links to articles about brewing and stuff like that. And if you were looking for content centered around Penny Dreadful, I know Caleb Gannon is a pretty popular guy that plays a lot of Penny Dreadful.
Okay.
And so he, is constantly brewing his own decks and actually playing them and talking about the format and what kind of decks he runs into and stuff like that. So there is a little bit of content about it, but I would say the main resource is probably that Discord.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a busy one too. I think I am a member there, and yeah, every time I've checked in, it's just blur of text. People are always talking, showing decks, chatting about matches and matchups and this and that. It's good times.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also, I plan on, now that my interest has been reinvigorated, I plan on playing a lot more of this format. Just at the price, you can't beat it.
You really can't. And I don't feel too bad saying that because I don't think we're missing much out of Classic Pauper at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely not. And when the Pauper metagame gets corrected, it's not like you have to play one or the other. Like, I don't think, like, I think both of these formats could serve two different purposes, but this is a really nice alternative to people that are maybe interested in brewing more and worrying about the top tiers of the metagame less.
Just look at some of the decks we talked about. You still get access to some really powerful cards, some really powerful synergies, creatures, spells, everything, without having to fight your way through Legacy or Modern or Vintage or whatever. This is its own little rotating format, and it's community dependent as well as community organized, which is awesome. It's really cool. It's really cool.
But I don't know if there's nothing else you really wanted to say about the format. This is mostly just like an intro to it.
Yeah, it kind of is just an intro to the format. No, I would love to revisit it after I get a dozen matches or so, or a dozen league matches under my belt. But yep, I don't know how much more we can delve into it without with as little as I know about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I'm no Penny Dreadful savant either, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I guess we can just move on to this week's Q&A. Yeah, so we're doing something a little bit different for this week's Q&A. We sort of wanted to purge ourselves completely from talking about Pauper metagame. So we requested that all of our questions be about not Pauper. And so we got some pretty good ones, some really interesting ones.
Specifically not Magic the Gathering, if they could help it.
Yeah.
Do you want to take the first one, or you want me to take the first one?
I'll go ahead and ask it. This comes from friend of the show, Big B. He wants to know if we could have any piece of art to have in our house. What would it be? Or our houses, I guess.
Yes. Mine, I didn't even have to. I had to look it up so I could get the name correct, but I didn't even have to think about it. It's Salvador Dali, soft construction with boiled beans, in parentheses, premonition of civil war. It is my favorite all-time piece of Salvador Dali art ever since I discovered it when I guess when I was an early teenager. I don't know.
Okay,
it's huge. I just want one of my giant walls in the west wing of my mansion can just be that painting.
Yeah. I see now that maybe I didn't understand the assignment when I thought of my answer.
Were you thinking of magic art?
Well, whenever he said any piece of art, I was just thinking like art in general, whether that be like written or music or anything.
Hey,
and so
art is art, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. So my answer is actually there's a band I really like called Dance Gavin Dance. And they have this really old EP called Whatever I Say Is Royal Ocean. And it's not that it's like some like super unattainable EP, but like they do cost more money than I'm willing to spend on it. But I would love to have a vinyl pressing of it. So
I would definitely consider that art. I have no problem with that.
Absolutely.
And you'd listen to it, right? You wouldn't be like one of those, you would put it in a frame and hang it on the wall. And
absolutely, I would listen to it. It's probably it's in my top 10 albums or EPs of all time, probably. So
excellent. I'll have to look that up.
So the next one comes from Jim James _MTG from Twitter. Wants to know what our favorite movies are.
I will let you go first. I answered the last one first, and I'm going to cheat and do like a top 3 or 5.
I also had a top 3. My all-time favorite movie is Donnie Darko.
Excellent choice.
Yeah, I really, really love that movie. I've seen it many, many times. And then I sort of have like a 2-way tie for second place. One of them is Your Name, which is sort of like, it's like an animated movie from Japan. And I really, really love the story, feel a really strong connection to it. And then the other one that's kind of tied there is maybe one of my favorite pieces of media ever, which is Shrek 2. To me, that movie is like the perfect sequel. And some of the pop culture references in that movie, like, phenomenal.
Yeah, they're pretty delicious. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a hell of a list. Yeah, I think I'm also going to go with a top 3, but I tend to ramble, so it may end up a top 5. But I think my first, if I had to pick a favorite movie, yeah, I definitely have a tie at first place between Tombstone and Natural Born Killers. Those are 2 movies that I could absolutely watch whenever they're on TV. I went through a phase way back in the day where I watched Natural Born Killers every night on VHS.
Okay.
I wore the tape out in 37 days. Had to buy a new one. But yeah, Tombstone, Natural Born Killers definitely tie for the top. I would have to fill out the top three with The Descent, the horror movie from the early 2000s. Probably one of my favorite horror movies, as well as the original Exorcist and the 2003 Texas Chainsaw remake.
Yeah, I guess actually there's one other one that I want to add to my list, and that is Cabin in the Woods.
Actually, yes, that is a fantastic movie.
Absolutely, it is.
Yep. Yep, I will watch that anytime that I have a chance.
Movies have like a really weird spot for me where I feel like I know a lot about certain like art mediums, and you don't necessarily have to know a lot about something to enjoy it. That's not what I'm insinuating here. But for me, I feel like I might enjoy television or movies more if I understood more what went into making them. And some of the choices, like lighting, like if I really understood like why did directors choose specific lighting, or like angles and stuff like that.
Yeah, like the representational cinematography or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, why they chose certain colors, or like you said, angles and perspectives and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can get that. I guess I don't think about that stuff too much when watching a movie. But I can definitely see that. Yeah, that makes sense. Ooh, this one comes from our buddy Colton. The show knows him well. Friend of the show, friend of both of ours. He has a deep, pressing, serious question. He wants to know, has Jeskai Dad finally moved away from Yoshi Main?
Yeah, so he is, of course, talking about Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I don't play that game very much anymore. I wish I did, because it's a lot of fun, and some of my best memories from the past 3 or 4 years are playing that game with friends.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I will forever be a Yoshi main in every game that includes Yoshi, because Yoshi is cute.
Yoshi is very cute. Yep.
Absolutely. It comes from Alex. He has a lot of questions.
Yep. I think we should just rapid fire them.
Yeah. I'm going to list them all at you, okay?
Okay.
Wimbledon picks.
None.
Favorite arcade game?
Original Street Fighter.
Would you rather play in the current Pauper meta for 24 hours or listen to Limp Bizkit's Nookie on repeat for 24 hours?
The current Pauper meta with Hymn to Turok being legal.
Okay. All right. Well,
I'll do anything to avoid Limp Bizkit for 24 hours. Sure. This one came from the Discord from Bandy. He was pretty creative with this one. They submitted it in card form. So the name of their question card is You Take a Break from Pauper. I think this was sort of inspired by the new D&D cards where they have the choose your own adventure type names. But this is You Take a Break from Pauper. It is a green and 1 for a rare. You get to choose 2 of these questions. What are your favorite card games that are not tradable card games or collectible card games? Or 2, what sport and or playground game did you enjoy most playing while growing up?
Do you just want to pick 2 for yourself to answer, and then I'll pick 2 for myself to answer?
Sure. What are my favorite card games that are not CCGs, TCGs? I am not a huge card game player outside of Magic. I was in the 90s. I played a lot of the Star Wars game. There was this, there was just Dragon's Dice game that was kind of cards, but kind of based around dice. That was fun. I'm always a big fan of Uno, any sort of kids card game that I can play with the children when they're sitting around doing nothing. That's always fun too. But as far as like the CCGs, TCGs, I'm not super into many of those at this moment. And then sports, I would say I am 100% baseball through and through.
I'm going to pick the same 2 questions. Favorite card games that aren't trading card games? I really love this game called Dominion. It's just a standard deck builder. It's really fun to play with friends. And then I'm not sure if this really counts, but I'm really big fan of this sort of like roguelike video game called Slay the Spire, that all the gameplay takes place from like a drafting cards game. And so those are probably my top 2 that aren't Magic. And then sports, I really love basketball. I know a lot about it. I really like playing it. I'm always down to talk basketball with anybody.
Excellent. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, you're from a pretty big. You're not from a baseball state. Yeah.
Hey, what are you talking about?
I mean, like, when I think of Tennessee, I think of college sports, college basketball and football, but specifically basketball over football, I think, is the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, especially here recently, I think, with the rebirth of the Tennessee basketball program. It's pretty easy to think basketball instead of football. That being said, Vanderbilt, which is local here to Nashville, is actually in the College World Series right now. So,
oh wow,
yeah.
Go Vanderbilt!
Well, they're in the finals of the College World Series, I guess is.
Those are always fun games to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the next question, I'm actually just going to ask to you because I'm not sure that I could successfully do this.
Yeah,
but it comes from friend of the show, Fernando. He wants to know you're building, or the statement is you're building the next big four of heavy metal.
Capital B.
And you have to pick new bands. Who's going to be there?
I think this is a tricky one. I think he's trying to fool us. Do you know what the big four is / are, Christian?
I have a rough idea, but I will let you go ahead and explain it just in case I'm wrong.
It was about 10 years ago. The Big Four was actually a concert tour. And the bands on the tour were Slayer, Anthrax, Megadeth, and Metallica. They pretty much they were the Big Four of metal, thrash metal, I think technically, but they are what are considered the Big Four of that genre. And they went on tour. They did a couple tours. They toured globally, internationally, and then they only did 2 shows here in the States, one in L.A. and then one in New York, I think at Shea Stadium. I actually went out to the L.A. show, flew out there specifically just for the show, rented the car, slept in the Home Depot parking lot. It was amazing. I didn't go to the New York show, but that's neither here nor there. So, yeah, I think he's just asking – well, he put the word new in quotes, so I'm not sure if he means – pick any 4 that aren't the original Big Four or pick newer metal bands. I have some choices. I don't know. I'm not huge into newer metal, but there's a few bands out there that I do like. I would have to say I'm going to go with my former opinion, the former of that previous statement, and pick new bands for the Big Four, so I don't repeat the original 4.
Okay.
I would have to say that System of a Down would be in that 4. There is a sadly not unpopular. I don't think they're popular enough for the music they put out, but they're an Italian heavy metal band. Their name is Distrage. I guess that's how you pronounce it. You should look them up. It's Destrage. They're also on Twitter. All their lyrics are in English. I don't know if that's something that turns people off or whatever. But excellent music, fantastic music. What other? Can you think of any other metal bands that might be in this Big Four here?
Yeah, so I couldn't necessarily list like like super big ones, but a band that always like comes to mind whenever somebody says like thrash metal is this band called The Number 12 Looks Like You. Mm-hmm. I really like specifically one album by them called Mongrel. When I was in high school, one of my best friends at the time really got me into the album, and it was one of those things where like I just like went through their entire catalog and I was like, oh man, this band is great. And then I found out that they had broken up like years ago. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. But they recently got back together. So. Oh,
nice. Yeah, if we're just adding bands similar to that, I would have to add Mr. Bungle, solely based off their most recent album. The album is entitled Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny Demo. And what it is their very, very first album back in the late 80s, I suppose, was called The Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny. It was a demo, and self-admittedly, or even they'll admit that it was pretty terrible. They were trying to write and play music that they weren't quite talented enough to pull off yet.
Okay.
But they wrote metal. It was like really hard metal, really fast metal. So now that they're all mature and older now, and they've sort of reunited, they're able to make this music, and it's one of the heavier albums I've ever listened to, especially from them. And kind of the cool thing about that is that this new version of Mr. Bungle includes Scotty Ian on guitar, who's from Anthrax, and Dave Lombardo on the drums, who's from Slayer. So it's a really cool like conglomeration of all these like super talented rock stars that are just melting faces.
Absolutely. I don't know. It's always so interesting to see you nerd out about stuff that isn't magic, just because we spend so much time talking about like home life and magic.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. It's really weird because I feel like with music specifically, there's just always like so much catching up to do. That like people will like say a band, and I'll be like, I've never heard of like this band, and they're like, are you sure? This band is like very, very popular and like
there's
genre
like 12
defining.
Albums.
You know? And it's like, all right, then I have to make a decision, like, do I want to commit like roughly 15 hours of my life to have this shared experience? But
right. Yep. 100%. I was thinking about this question earlier before we even started recording. I would have to add the Dillinger Escape Plan to this list.
Oh, yeah. They also recently got back together, I believe.
Did they?
Yeah.
I didn't follow them too closely. I did for a while when Mike Patton did, like, he joined them. They made an EP together and yada, yada, yada. And then, a couple of years after that, they broke up, and I hadn't really followed them since. Yeah,
the Miss Machine album is also just like a really like era defining for me because it was one of my favorite albums in high school. So like anytime somebody mentions Dillinger, I get this feeling in my heart of like really weird nostalgia. Yeah, because it's like I was like still in high school, right? So like I was like really weird, kind of like still in my shell or whatever. But it was like there were like a few things that somebody could talk to me about that would really bring me out. And there are a few bands that were like that, and for me specifically, Miss Machine, but overall, the Dillinger Escape Plan was a band like that for me.
Excellent. I had no idea you liked them, let alone even heard of them. Most people are like, okay, I've never heard of those people, so just keep talking.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't know, this was more of like something that's really popular around here, at least, is sort of like Southern hardcore, or at least amongst the people that I hung out with and still do.
Sure.
And so like a lot of bands that I'm really into are sort of like metal adjacent, but like you couldn't really call it like heavy metal or anything. But
yeah, even like Dillinger and Mr. Bungle and them, they're more like avant-garde metal than traditional metal.
Yeah.
So it's kind of mind-blowing if you've ever actually seen the list of legitimate heavy metal subgenres, subclassifications, like sludge metal and dredge metal and all this other stuff. It's crazy.
There's also like one of the, I don't know, maybe we should start a metal music podcast.
I think
one of like the things too that I think actually sort of makes it hard to talk about it is there are like a lot of bands that I really like that I would never mention the band's name on air.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And so there are a few bands from that list that like I could easily make like a top 4 list from. But
oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. We've all got those.
Yep.
I probably got a stack of their CDs somewhere that they only come out when I'm in dark corners.
Exactly.
Myself.
Right.
Yep. I guess we answered Fernando's question. I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Fernando, if you're not satisfied with the answer, you can come on next week just at the end and tell us. So I guess that's going to do it for this episode of Common Knowledge. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find me on Twitter at JessGuyDad. Brad, where can they find you?
On Twitter at Popper_B or Brad DracV on MTGO.
And you can reach both of us at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. If you guys have any questions on the Pauper format or Penny Dreadful, MTGO, or anything else, like I said, shoot us an email, leave a comment down below, reach out on Twitter, reach out to Brad on MTGO, however you want to do it. Thanks again to our sponsor, PureMTGO.com, as well as the Constructive Criticism Network for letting us be a part of it. And last, but certainly not least, thank you for listening. Take very good care of each other.
And never stop playing budget formats.